Welcome, everyone. Am I on? Yep. Welcome, everyone. I just want to say thank you for joining us tonight in this public forum. I want to assure you that everything is on the table, so if you have questions about anything regarding the district, we'll be happy to address those as best we can. We do have Superintendent McGovern and other staff members here as well. And so with that introduction, I would turn it over to Mr. Duncan, our Chief Financial Officer, and he's going to give us a little bit of a budget update while we proceed. And I would encourage any of you with questions to go to the chat and submit those questions, and we will take as many of the questions as we possibly can. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Big picture budget-wise for next year and the next 3 years is we're projecting a deficit of a little over 3 million for next year. So that would be school year 21-22. And we're projecting a deficit of about 7.8 the following year. And in 23-24, about a $12.8 million deficit. Now, there are some soft numbers in there, especially for next year. One of those is our tax shortfall grant, and that happens when our property tax collections are less than what's estimated based on the assessment. And those can swing pretty big from one year to the next. For example, this last year, our tax shortfall grant was just shy of $2 million. And I think we're probably at least on track this year to reach that, although we won't know for sure until May when we receive our second big portion of the property taxes.
Scott, can I just ask a really quick question, just because I speak from the common sense? As far as the 3 million that we're looking at next year, what is that from?
Yeah, that's mainly from a decrease in our ADMs, so our student enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Another soft number is the special ed cap, and we've been capped for 2 years now because it's been frozen by the legislature. There is a secondary funding mechanism for that, but even after that, this last year, that we were missing about $625,000 from what we actually spent. And to put that into perspective, a 10% cut from our foundation is about 8.1 million. A 20% reduction would be a 16.2 million dollar cut, and a 30% reduction would be a $24.42 million reduction. Now, currently, if you look just for next year, we know we're going to be in deficit by the $3 million. There are a couple of House bills going through the legislature now. House Bill 61, that would have an across-the-board cut of about $100 million. For our district, that would be about 5.8. So if you take the 3 million and the 5.8, that puts us at about 8.8 million in the hole. And that's a little over 10% of our foundation guarantee. There's another bill, House Bill 89, and that goes in and adjusts certain elements of the funding model, mainly for instructional facilitators, salaries, some activities, professional development days, and that would equate to about a cut of 2.6 million. So we're still looking at 5.6 with the expected deficit. Is there any questions so far? Anything coming up?
No, I don't see anything yet.
Okay, Mr. Duncan, just to give the public an idea, right now we're sitting with about an $81 million budget. That's the foundation guarantee from the state.
That's correct. Yes, the 81.
Just to give them an idea of where we are. So when you talk about a 10% cut, that's where the 8.1 comes from, 2016.2, and therefore.
Exactly.
And that is the based on the funding model that you hear so much about. Public education in Wyoming is funded through. It's based on ADMs. When we talk about ADM, I know education is just filled with acronyms. So please, I will try to monitor that a little bit so that we can get the public up to speed. And when we're talking about something, but the ADM is the average daily membership. So what that refers to is the number of students that are attending on an average every day in our schools. So that's what the funding model is basically based on, with some other things that pertain to um, different areas. Actually, the funding is based on 4 areas. It's personnel, which is divided into certified staff as well as classified staff. And then there are utilities, and then the supplies is the 4th category. So those are the categories that the funding model is broken into. And then there are lots of special cases. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But please, if you know, we're here to answer questions, and that's what we'd like to do. Um, any, do we have anything yet?
No, we had Sarah Wright that's thanking the board and administration for the information and taking the time to share everything with them.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Well, let's, Mrs. McGovern, would you like to?
We do, sorry, we have a question that's come up. Lorna says, I thought that there were some amendments to House Bill 61 that added the 1% sales tax and also reduced the cuts from 100 million to 22 million. Did I read that correctly?
There are some amendments that are working their way through the House Education. House Education Committee met yesterday at noon. And so there are those are some amendments that are being attached. That's in committee. I don't believe anything has been passed out of committee at this point, so they're still in the discussion phase. But those are some proposals that are out there. There is a 1% sales tax that would go into effect when the backup to the foundation program funding gets, I believe, below 650 million. So that tax increase would not go into effect until the backup funds are down a little bit more than they are now. I believe there were some amendments because there is concern about the constitutionality of $100 million across the board cut. And so those concerns are starting to surface. And as other committee members start posing some problems with some of the work that's been done, both on House Bill 61 and, is it 89? 89 is the second one. So there are some concerns there. I believe there was some talk today. Senator Rothfuss and Representative Connolly actually is presenting something that more closely follows the funding model as it has been recalibrated. So there's lots of discussion going on, and we are right now basically at the legislature's mercy of what they deem is a highly qualified education that is cost-based. That's the concern with the $100 million cut across the board, is that it's not cost-based. And so that's one of the requirements from the Supreme Court cases earlier in Wyoming history, back in the 70s. And it has to be cost-based. And that's why as consultants are hired every 5 years to go through the recalibration process. That's the process that went on this last year. And that's the model, House Bill 61, that is being moved forward, is the result of the recalibration effort this past year.
Thank you, Ms. Jellicoe. So Taylor Skinner asked regarding the $8.1 million budget, whether that was just for Sweetwater County or the entire state. I actually answered that in the chat, that it's just for Sweetwater 1 specifically. And then the next question is, when budgets are cut, what kind of changes will we see in the district?
Up to this point, we have been sustaining cuts for a number of years. And we have been successful in making the cuts and trying to keep students as least affected as possible. The one effect that has had an impact on students is our increase in class size. And even at that, we've tried to keep it to a workable level. The number of cuts that are being proposed at this point would impact class size even more, to the tune of maybe having, if we were to talk worst case scenario, perhaps 30, 35 kids in classes. 30 children in an elementary class is just unthinkable. This is where potentially the closing of schools might come in. So even though the legislature controls the amount of money that comes to the budget, or comes to the district, I should say, the district and the board then basically decides how that money is used. And so that's basically how the system works. If we have less money to work with, then that's where the cuts come in. There are some bills out there that would cut all activities by the funding of all activities, including transportation of those activities students, by 50%. There are other thoughts out there about cutting activities completely from the budget. In other words, there would be no school activities, including athletics. Everything would have to be paid for by the community. So those are some drastic things that are out there, but they're out there. And so this forum is an attempt to help the public understand what the district is facing.
Thank you. Our next question, I think that you somewhat addressed this, but I want to make sure I bring every question up. So what would be cut from the category? So what would be cut from the category, the 4 categories you mentioned?
Scott or Kelly, would you like to address that? Whichever.
Go ahead. Good evening, everyone. When Carol and Scott had started, we're really down to student programs, instructional programs for kids, student activities that Carol had mentioned about some of the bills where they want to decrease the funding for all activities, our class sizes. We've tried to keep those the best that we can. You don't want to increase those. Closing schools and jobs for our staff. So on the question about what would be cut in those categories, for all the cuts that we've done over the last several years, this is where we're at for things. Over the last several years, we've taken many steps for the district to help with the budget cuts that we've experienced in previous years. Perhaps maybe we go into that just a little bit and share that information.
I was just going to interject here a moment that we're in the people business. We have students, people, our staff, our people. 86%, I believe, of our budget is tied up in salaries and benefits. So when we're talking about the size of cuts that could be coming down, that's where the biggest impact is going to be, is how do we maneuver through those cuts, realizing that the biggest part of our budget by far is people. Please proceed.
Oh, sure. On that document, Zach, actually, I believe that's the one that you had that had the talking points on there. This one actually lists some of the highlights of the cuts that we've done since 2015, 2016. So in the first year, 75 paraprofessionals. The district was in a severe budget crunch again at that time, and 75 paraprofessionals lost their positions through a reduction in force. In the next year, we had frozen salaries. We absorbed positions through all areas of the district. In the next year, 17, 18, again, frozen salaries. We closed a school. We changed start and end times so that transportation and such could be more efficient. We did an early retirement incentive for 25 certified positions so that our teachers would not lose their job. We changed the insurance plan for the district. We went to higher deductibles and saved 1.5 million for that. We eliminated instructional facilitator positions, saving 1.17 million. Revising bus schedules, that was 280,000 that we've saved. And also in moving forward into our current years, frozen salaries. In the last 2 years, we have had a very difficult time recruiting and retaining teaching staff. So in 1920, we were unable to fill 25 positions on the very first day of school. And so we had 15 full-time substitute positions in lieu of a certified teacher. And again, at this school year in 2021, we faced the same bleak picture. We had 11 and a half certified positions that we were unable to fill. And we closed all of those positions because there were no qualified candidates. And we put into place 5.5 long-term substitutes. Sweetwater One is one of 26 school districts that does not get fully reimbursed for special education. We're underfunded. And last year, that resulted in $625,633 that the district did not receive. And I think probably over the last several years, we've absorbed approximately 148 positions. And that's through classified, certified teachers, and also central administration staff as well. Those are just some of the steps that we've taken.
Okay, we have a few more questions coming through now. Robert Daniels said, will the federal government be funding more Title IV this year in Wyoming?
Title,
On that question, that's a great question, Robert. We will have to wait and see what the final allocations are for that grant as we move forward.
Okay.
So we don't know that one quite yet.
So we have a few that kind of tie in together. So I'm just going to read through all of these. What can we as the public do? I guess the better question is, how can we as the public help and support the district so we have a smaller effect? And then also other folks would like to know what can be done to help and support the district.
as I said earlier, we're right now at the mercy of the state legislature. And so any interaction that you could have with our state senators, our state representatives in advocating for the district and actually advocating for all districts, because we're in this together. As I said earlier, the $100 million is not an equitable way to reduce funding. It violates in our opinion, violates the Supreme Court's decision, and it is basically capricious and arbitrary. They picked a number. And so that's why our system is cost-based, and that's where we have, as costs rise, that's why our budgets have risen over the last several years, even among cuts. The biggest part of the budget, and actually education funding has been fairly constant, but because of health insurance. And as you and the public well know, your health insurance costs are probably rising too. That is the biggest factor in increases to the state budget as well as the national budget. It's a national problem. So any interaction that you could have with state legislators would be helpful, and tell your personal stories, how it could impact you if some of these cuts were implemented. Sure, Mrs. Bolton?
More information. So, um, maybe I guess I'll be a little more direct, but, in HR, my job is personnel and upholding policies. And so I have been living this effect of not being able to fill positions. And ultimately, what happens is that we don't put a highly qualified classroom teacher in front of the students. We know that the number one difference that is made in a classroom and with children is with a high-quality teacher.
Can I
Without a
just
high-
want to clarify really quick, Nicole, because I don't know that the public understands. When we say we can't fill the positions, what's the cause of not being able to fill the positions?
So we're not able to fill the positions because we raised our base salary for teachers. Our biggest area that we try to draw from is the Utah area. And we did raise our base salaries in hopes to be more attractive to the graduates and stuff to come up to this area. And it was great for 2 weeks. And then multiple districts in the Salt Lake Valley matched our salary. With them not giving us an increase in cost of living, our benefits have gone down. And so we don't have as much incentive to entice people to come here because we don't have Target, we don't have the pro teams, we don't have all the restaurants. And so, I mean, you have to have a special love, and I love Wyoming. And I think once we get them here, a lot of them learn to love it. But that is one of the challenges that we have. And we have a teacher shortage in America anyways. And out of all the graduates, they say about 50% drop out of teaching within the first 5 years and don't come back. And so with that, when I can't put a high quality teacher in front of the students, that directly impacts the students, and that's not okay. We have to be competitive in our salaries for teachers. We have to be competitive in our salaries for administrators, and we have to be competitive in our salaries for directors. I think that the one question I asked the legislators was, have you ever seen the effect that a bad teacher has on a student? Because I have, as an employee and as a parent. And have you guys ever seen the effect that a bad principal has on a school? Maybe a school even full of great teachers. Because I have, and the end result is impacting kids. And have you guys ever seen the effect that a bad superintendent has on a district? Because we've lived that as well. And if we are not competitive, we are not going to get quality candidates in to fill these roles. And I know that administration is often attacked, but in an industry, typically a supervisor has about 7 subordinates. Our principals have 25 to 27 subordinates. And then on top of that, 200 to 500 kids, depending where they're at. It's hard to be effective with those kind of numbers, but they tend to pull it off. And so when you want to know how this is going to affect you, we have tried to keep the cuts away from kids. And I think that we have done a very good job, but it has been at the expense of all of our employees and us. I mean, we have not taken any benefits that the employees don't have. If they were frozen, we were all frozen. So the next set of cuts that come through are sports, activities, events that we're able to offer, the basket of goods, which is what your children need in order to graduate. Essentially, these cuts will make it so that we are not able to offer what the Constitution requires us to offer. And that really is where the problem comes. And we need parents to be contacting our legislators and our senators and telling them that this is not okay. Because here is the reality. I keep hearing, well, school districts need to take a cut. Everybody else is taking a cut. School districts need to take their share. Well, over the last 5 years that I've been in this position, every single year we've taken cuts. Every single year we've worked with the state. And somehow we've made it happen. We've had more to do with less. It's not okay that, the Department of Health or any of them are taking cuts. It's not, but that is not at the expense of education. That is a direct result of our state not doing what they promised to do and start bringing in alternative revenue streams.
It's terrifying. Sorry, Nicole, I'm going to jump in because I get very heated about this, and I absolutely love Wyoming. I was born in Wyoming. I want to raise my kids. My grandkids are being raised here. And I've heard legislators say, well, public health, we've cut community health. We're not taking care of our elderly. We're not providing immunizations for our youth. I'm really scared at what the legislature is doing to the state. I mean, in no case is any of this okay, what they're doing to education, what they're doing to our health services for our community. And I just think it's really important for those of us who love Wyoming to make sure that we express, how critical these services are and how critical things are for our kids and for our elderly and for our community health. It truly scares me.
Well, and I think what people need to realize is exactly that. You know, I've taken the stance and I will continue to take the stance. We shouldn't have to take any more cuts in education. The Constitution set what we have to do, and it's the state's job to fund it. And just because other areas are cut or we're in this crisis, it's because for over 5 years now, they've said we can't cut our way out of this. We've got to find new revenue streams, and they've failed to do that. So instead of blaming education and all these other places that are having to take cuts, it's time that the state does what they promised to do and they bring in these extra revenue streams. And I know people are saying no new taxes, no new taxes, no new taxes. Well, when we get all these cuts, I guarantee a penny tax is going to be a lot cheaper than what people are going to be paying out of their pocket if they want sports and transportation offered for kids.
Well, we've even heard them speak of the low hanging fruit in a recent meeting, that the data centers in the eastern part of the state are tax exempt status. So why do we have these organizations coming in the state and not paying taxes? And I know, Carol, I know Chair Jellicoe spoke about the big box legislation that didn't pass recently. I think it's time we stand up for our state, but I do want to make sure that we get to the rest of the questions. So the next time is worst case scenario. How many schools would have to be closed to meet the expected budget cuts?
I'll go ahead and
Okay.
take that one if you want. The answer to that one depends upon what the legislative cuts would be. So, for example, Zach, there's a document in there, the cost analysis of ideas. And on the bottom of that document, it lists different schools, school 1, school 2, school 3. So say, for example, it was roughly 6 million. So House Bill 61 would be 5.791 million on Sweetwater 1. And so when you take a look at that bottom, school 1, school 2, school 3, and you add those up pretty quickly, it'll let you see what that would be for us. So 6 million could be 3 schools, possibly 2 schools that would close. It depends on how bad they cut education. I think one thing that's really important too is the time to act on this is now. The time to get in touch with our legislators. I know this last week we had a legislative meeting with Sweetwater number 2 and a couple of the legislators that attended that meeting. There were several that did not. But when people come to Rock Springs and they see boarded up schools, schools that are closed, it's too late. So the time to move forward on that is now. The time to reach out to people and let them know what you value, what you believe. Please do that now for our kids, for our staff, for their programs. The time's now.
If you're not sure who your legislators are, your representatives or your senators, you can Google Wyoming legislature, and that'll take you to the WyoLeg website. Actually, Zach is pulling it up right here so you can see it. And as you scroll down, it will tell you that you can pick your senator, you can locate your senator and your representative. In some cases, you can put your address in and it'll come up who it is. Legislators are human beings like anyone. They typically respond to their constituents. I would encourage you to do individual kinds of emails to them rather than any kind of a group. They tend to not pay as much attention to group emails as they do to an individual one. But share with them the kind of, what the impact's going to be like if some of these cuts are implemented. What it would mean to your family if there were no activities for your children and families had to support that. that cost. So those are the kinds of things that we would encourage you to do. And when I said, share those concerns, and if you're willing to tell them whether you're willing to support a penny tax for education. That's the stipulation that we're hearing across the state, is that people would gladly, but would pay a penny tax if it's dedicated for education. There's hesitancy if it just goes into the general fund because they want it dedicated to education funding. I would also add that we've been told that there are 18 representatives at this time. Realize that the House has 60 representatives. 18 of those have signed no new tax pledges. So they've not all been, I've don't know exactly who all of them are, but if their constituents start saying, no, we're willing to pay this, we want a high quality education for our kids, for our grandkids, for our community, then some of them may change their minds. So that's something that information that I would give you as far as where you can find the information to contact your senator and your representative.
Okay. The next question we have is, will the start and end times next year and the 4-day week help retain jobs?
We hope.
The most the 4-day week does is it does help with the costs on Fridays, such as substitute costs. That tends to be our highest absent day. So hopefully Thursday doesn't become that new day. And I don't anticipate that it will, but that should save, I think, how much was it? I can't
It's
remember.
about 400,000.
About $400,000. We have been very frugal on filling positions unless they're absolutely needed in order to save money to offer early retirement incentives and some other things in order to try to save jobs. The last thing we want to do is get rid of any teachers, because once we lose them, they don't come back. I think it's important for people to realize when Sweetwater One is the largest employer in Sweetwater County, and really education is typically the center of most communities, that when education's affected, every other part of the economy within that community is affected. And so it's important that people realize the domino effect that this can have. And I know people ask about donating money and different things like that, but when you're looking at an $8.1 to $11 million cut, that could be upward of four elementary schools. And if we close 4 elementary schools, we don't have the space to relocate those kids anywhere else. So these cuts that are being proposed are absolutely devastating. We have a self-regulating funding model that automatically adjusts based off of enrollment. And so we're already down because of COVID, which is scary because when enrollment goes back up and I have to open those jobs up in August, I'm not going to have the applicants to fill the positions. So you take that cut deeper, we're in big trouble.
And I would like to kind of clarify a little bit what it means to close a school. We're looking at closing an actual facility, but those students have to go somewhere. And those students will need teachers that will need to go somewhere. So what will happen is the buildings that are not at capacity now will receive students from, we'll redistrict is what we'll have to do for elementary schools. And that means that more students will be going to fewer schools. Those teachers will go with the students, but at the same time, there'll be more students in each of those classes. And that's where class sizes could go to 30 or 35. And those are just, I know it was many, many years ago, because I've been in the district since 1973. And in 1973, I came here from Ogden, Utah, just north of Salt Lake. And I had taught 2 years in the Weber County schools at that time. And I had classes of 35 to 40 kids at that time. And came here and with class sizes of about half that size. literally, I thought I died and gone to heaven because it has that much impact on the individual attention that can be given to students when you have fewer kids in the class. And Wyoming has always prided itself on small class sizes so that students can get that individual attention that they need to grow and prosper. And I don't want to become another Utah, but that's the kind of thing that we're facing with the budget cuts that are looming. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I'd also like to say, we have other trustees on the, virtually with us. So I would encourage you, if any of you want to speak up, please, I don't mean to dominate this conversation, but if any of you have anything to say, please let us know, and I'm more than happy to have you speak with the public as well. Anyone?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Jackman? Matt?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Sorry. So as treasurer of the board, I'm committed to saving the jobs as possible, doing the best job for our kids. I need your to tell your like what's important. I don't think they understand the impact of 35 kids in a classroom that they mandated was only built for 16 kids. You know, bunk for next year. I don't think they understand the impact of not offering free busing for kids and what that does to communities. So let them know what that looks like for you, because until their voters say, we're not going to vote for you anymore, they're not going to do anything. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, please feel free to jump in at any time.
All right, we do have several more questions that have come up. Kevin asks, would a dedicated grant writer help the district?
I'll go ahead and I'll take that one. We actually do. We have a director of grants and federal programs, and we have several grants that do that very function, Kevin. I think your idea is wonderful, and we maximize that the very best that we can. Whether it's through our Perkins funding or additional grants above and beyond that, that is exactly what we're trying to do to help subsidize the general fund as we move forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. The next question is, why don't we get fully funded for special education services?
I can take that one. Wyoming actually was one of the only states that was actually 100% reimbursed as of, for a long time, actually. What happens is when you have a good education system and you can provide services, you end up having people move because you can provide those services that they need. And what happens is you run out of money because you don't have that revenue coming in. And so in 2018-19, I think, Scott, they put a cap on for the 17-18 school year. And so when that happened, that was a year that we had retirees, couldn't fill positions. And so they put a cap on that year's reimbursement, which I think was 12 million, 13 million.
Yeah, just a tad
Yeah.
over 13 million.
Yeah, a little over 13 million. And so what happened is since that, we're having more students identified, more students moving into the district. And with more identification, we have to provide more services for these students. And now we're finding that our students are needing more mental health. They're needing more services that we have to provide, which means you have to increase staff because of the numbers and because of teachers and making sure they're getting what they need. The other issue is because we're seeing abundance of more students, we've actually increased every year at least 1% to 2% on students identified under IDA. So that costs you money on top of what you're already budgeted for. So that happens. And then when we have students that move in, we're not seeing students that might just have an Arctic need with a speech pathologist. We're having students that are coming in with major mental health, and sometimes the school can't support them with their services or therapies they may need. And so we're looking at outside facilities, and those cost the district a lot of money. So on top of having a cap, we're having an increase in numbers and more services have to be provided.
And I might add that IDA does not say, if you have the money, you provide these services. It says you provide the services and find the money. So if the cap is on, then those monies, as Scott said earlier, last year was 600 and some odd $1,000 that we had to fund out of the general fund because those services have to be provided. The alternative is a lawsuit. And obviously, we want to provide the services for the students that we should be providing. But IDEA mandates that we provide those services, and lack of funding is not an excuse.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of comments, questions that tie in together here. Coral says, I can't find a date or reason for mental health supports not being funded in grades K-6. I'm just curious what current needs and research would show compared to the year that was decided. And then Mad Shami said, I would agree. I think counselors at the schools are some of the most important people in the schools. Without the support of them for the kids in today's age, it would be a disaster. Thank you guys very much.
Actually, the funding model in its current form does not even provide for counselors in the elementary level. That's just wrong. And that's one of the things that we tried to persuade. And I'm trying to think what, if there was an addition to the recalibration. I don't think there has been. And we provide services, counseling services in our elementary through grants. And that's how we've been able to provide those services. But it just seems unconscionable that there's not counseling services provided for in the funding model at the elementary level.
You know,
Mrs.
Chair,
McGovern?
Chair Jellicoe, just to add on top of that, you know, I don't know what our district would do without the support of our counselors. You know, earlier this week, we had a very unfortunate situation in one of our schools, and the way the counselors rallied with one another to support the staff and the kids, I don't know what we would have done without the support and the expertise that those people bring throughout. And the mental health needs of our students, it seems that it increases every year. You know, we're going through probably the worst time with COVID and the pandemic, and the needs of our kids, what our families are going through, and the supports. And there isn't the funding for those in the elementary level for what we need. And some of our counselors are funded through grants, others are funded through the general fund. But that's the important piece of local control, because through working together with the board and administration, we've actually made a priority to take care of our students in that social emotional learning that they need, and have actually allocated money for those positions for our counselors and such that our schools and our kids desperately need. But that's been a priority for our district. So Coral, on your question, I don't ever remember a time where it's actually had that funding in there.
There's other positions not funded either.
Nurses.
There's lots of things that we have to provide that are not funded but are essential to K-12 education. It's not just counselors, it's also our nurses. Did you guys know that our our food service, that's not funded at all. We're expected to be self-sustaining. We can't, so we have to give from the general fund in order to do that. With SPED capped, that comes out of our general fund. So it's all of these little things that either aren't funded or are being cut that are pulling away from everything else. So it's not just counselors who are so important too. There's many aspects that we have to provide that the model hasn't been updated to fund.
And I would also say, when legislators place these caps on various things because transportation has had a cap on it, special ed has had a cap on it. You know, it's amazing to me. We're a state-funded system. We get all of our money from the state. And so when something is capped, the money has to come from someplace. So my question to legislators is, where does that money come from? We get all the money from you. And so that's why the funding model that we have and the flexibility that we have in the funding model is so important. There's no two districts out of the 48 districts in the state of Wyoming that are the same. Every one of us have unique characteristics. And so the funding model gives us the flexibility to take money from one area and use it in another. One area that the legislators keep bringing up is that of tutors. We don't use a lot of tutors in Sweetwater One, but we do get some money funded for tutors. So we use that money. It would probably go to our benefits, our salaries and benefits of some of our other people. So insurance is another thing. There's talk about taking the insurance money out of and making it a reimbursement program. Insurance plans vary dramatically throughout the state. We're fortunate in having the insurance plan that we do. We've worked very hard. Mr. Duncan has worked very hard to streamline that and make it as effective as possible. Thank you, Scott. But there are some districts in this state that have $5,000 and $10,000 deductibles. Because as I said earlier, health insurance is one of the biggest expenses in any industry, in any business when you're dealing with people. So I just want to throw that out there because that's another thing as you talk with legislators, encourage them to keep the flexibility in the system, to refrain from isolating certain things like insurance and saying we're going to do a reimbursement for that only because that takes away the flexibility the district has in utilizing the funds that we are given.
Okay, our next two questions again tie in together. Would parents and citizens of Sweetwater County that are located in District 1 be able to donate money to the school board to help save programs? And can businesses donate to an activity fund?
The answer to that is yes. We have a district policy that governs donations as they come in. So it would be appropriate and thankful for those. We do have businesses that donate now to a certain activity and such that, and we appreciate those very much because those go directly to the kids.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next question, when will teachers be notified if their position is being absorbed? And when will we know if school or schools are closing? I appreciate this forum and the hard work that has gone into this.
State statute provides that any teacher who is not being renewed for contract has to be notified by April 15th. That makes this late session problematic because they just started yesterday. They had 10 days earlier in January, more of a virtual, and then they started a hybrid yesterday that is supposed to run through this month. That means we may not know exactly where we stand until the end of the month, which gives us a matter of days in order to complete the plans to do whatever we need to do. Again, until we know exactly what those cuts are, it's difficult. We're playing with different scenarios, obviously, but until we actually know what those cuts are, we clearly do not want to identify people or notify people because we want to retain everyone that we possibly can. So our hope is that with some of the talk that's been going on recently, that maybe the cuts may not be as dramatic as first thought. That would be a blessing. But at the same time, we have to be ready to take on as much as $100 million, which would be about $8 million to us. So there are plans that are going on, but by statute, we do have to notify people. So that means that those decisions about schools and teachers are going to have to be made pretty much by April 15th.
Thank you. I think Mr. Mickelson wants to address everyone.
Mr. Mickelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have three things briefly. One, there's presented often, both when our legislative folks are meeting in committee or in session or just talking to the public, and then often in the narrative of public discussion, that all government is inefficient, all government spending is bad, and that we really would be a lot better off as a society if we just eliminated government. And the underlying reality is that the variability that we have to have a forum like this and to have it attended and to have people be able to provide questions and feedback instantaneously all came through government investment. Apple, Google, Microsoft, our entire 21st century economy came from government investment. And the number one investment that government can make is in education. When you look at a state like Kansas, where people very fervently believed that public education was undermining social values, and they defunded it, they wrecked their entire state's economy. Businesses left. There will be no diversification here. We won't be able to retain doctors here if we do not have a robust educational system. That is not how you create thriving communities. And it is very critical that our legislative folks hear from people who are willing to support and invest in their community through education. And as we're looking at the different areas where we can cut, and finding that there really aren't very many, I certainly hope that no one thinks it appropriate to suggest that somebody who is working full-time and dealing with children, whether they are a teacher or an administrator or in food services or a secretary, is somehow not worthy of being adequately compensated, because they are dealing with 10-year-olds who are routinely cutting themselves, who have suicidal ideation, who come from homes with food insecurity and housing insecurity and are dealing with just absolutely awful things. And our focus is to get them to grow academically while addressing all of those issues. But if we want our communities to survive and to be here, we really have to ensure that the legislative folks here, that we are willing to invest in education and that the people providing that service are valuable to us and important to the overall well-being of our state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mickelson. Our next question, what effect on elementary specials do you anticipate?
Honestly, I can't answer that question because I don't know. It's tough that these sessions are so late and they're going to give us decisions so late because I have no guidance to give people, and I know that doesn't help. Can I tell you that I know the superintendent is not either. We are losing a lot of sleep along with our board members because when I just got a call from a teacher who's hysterical. They feel like they need to start applying for other jobs. I have a teacher that is having anxiety attacks. They don't know if they're going to keep their job. We're hearing that this and that. It is a terrible feeling that our employees are going through so much stress and anxiety on top of everything else that has come this year. And there is nothing we can do to comfort it because we don't have the facts. We have projections and what ifs, but I don't have the facts. And so therefore, to make assumptions or put something out there that's not true, I don't want to say something that stresses people out if it's not what has to happen. I can tell you it is a priority for all of us to keep art, music, PE, library, those things that are so critical to our students' well-rounded education, but I can't fully answer that. I wish I could.
Thank you, Nicole. Our next question, how would House Bill 77 affect Sweetwater County?
Is it House Bill 77 or 177? I've got some notes on 177. That's the one about adding civics to the basket of goods.
Is that the
I'm-
one you were speaking about, Cindy? Sorry. We'll hold off on that one for just a minute and move on to the next one.
It is cold. I saw you turning down
Okay.
the heat.
Stephanie, just real quick while we're
Yes.
waiting for some clarification, I want to go back to the question about the specials and add just a little bit more about what Nicole was saying about what are going to be the effects of specials. I think one thing that's really interesting, when the pandemic first started and we started doing the video recordings and getting information out and making sure that our staff was able to see us and communicate with us through that time. You know, one of the recommended things from psychologists and counselors and mental health professionals in education and outside of education was to participate with music. Make sure you get exercise, health, and PE. Take and participate in the arts. And so, in the most difficult of times, which this last year has surely been, you know, it is those things and the specials that have really got us through. And so Sweetwater One has always valued what our specials do for kids and to make them be well-rounded. And it's very important for us to continue those things the very best that we can, as well as the core classes. As much as our counselors are, it's all important to kids and to our staff. And I think that's important for me to say.
Thank you, Kelly.
Superintendent, House Bill 77 is the school district reorganization.
Well, so the reorganization of the school districts, this comes and goes regularly lately. There's been many studies done about the savings, and the savings is not as much as they would think. It's interesting that legislators talk about consolidating school districts down to one per county, one district per county, which would mean that Sweetwater 1 and Sweetwater 2 would become one district. The interesting thing is that legislators talk about it, about other districts doing that, but not their district. Wyoming is very rural, as all of us know. And for many districts, the school is the center of the life in that community. We have trustees from Wamsutter and Farson. And I don't, if Andrea is on, if she'd like to speak to Farson, I'd really defer to her. But in many of these communities, if the small districts were absorbed into bigger districts, there's a very good chance that they would lose their local schools. And we all know what happens when local schools leave a community. The community is no more. That's the center of their community. Farson and Wamsutter, their school is the absolute center of their community. That's where they have community activities and various fundraisers and those kinds of things around their community needs. So consolidation comes around and it's looked at all the time, but the savings is not as great as many people suspect they would be. There have been efforts to economize, I guess is the best way of saying it, by trying to use some common parts of the district. There's talk about consolidating business departments or consolidating transportation departments. But at the same time, let's just take an example. Let's say that we were going to consolidate the transportation departments of Sweetwater 1 and Sweetwater 2. that's not going to save that much money because we still have to have the buses in each community to get their kids to and from school. It's not like we can share buses from Green River to Rock Springs. So the savings, when we talk about consolidation, are really not as great as people think. And the other thing is that as we talk about efficiencies, there's a lot of efficiencies that have been going on. Nicole spoke earlier about our nutrition services. Sweetwater One belongs to a co-op, a group of districts that have gotten together and purchased their food together so that they can get better prices on them. So those are the kinds of efficiencies that are taking place. And so the actual consolidation of school districts would not produce the savings that a lot of people think it would.
Hey, Jellicoe, can I ask a follow-up question for you?
Sure.
When they say consolidating school districts, and I know that there's some districts that are 5 miles apart, two districts 5 miles apart, but I guess I'm wondering, so we consolidate transportation. I know as a human resource director that they still have to have a supervisor over there.
Mhm.
And I know that over here, and I know Green River has been efficient in their own ways in absorbing positions, or we don't have a superintendent over here, and we have 5,000 plus students, almost 1,000 employees, the largest in the district with one human resource director, that we also combine the assistant superintendent position, which I don't really get to. So the actual superintendent has to pick up a lot of those duties, which pulls her from the duties she's supposed to be doing. But I'm like, if they combined us, there's no way I could pick up all of their employees. So we'd still need 2 HR departments. So I guess, is the only savings going to be really in the end absorbing a superintendent? And then at that point, they would have to have an assistant or something because it would be such a large district. I don't know where hardly any savings would happen with that because you
That's-
have to have leaders.
Yeah, that's what I said. The savings is not as great as you think it is, as you think it would be.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Summers would like to make a comment.
Andrea, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to speak a little bit to efforts of consolidation and what that does to small communities. Like Chairman Jellicoe said, the schools tend to be the heart of communities, especially, the small communities. So we have in Farson, our school serves as our community library because we don't have one. Our school serves as a blood drive center when they do blood drives in the community. There are a number of community functions that occur within our school. We're very fortunate in Sweetwater One that our administrators are committed to maintaining Wamsutter and Farson, but in the past, in the late 60s, early 70s, Wyoming forced consolidation of a number of small districts. And what happened to those small communities is most of those small communities, they lost their voice. And then as a consequence, they lost their schools altogether. You lose local control when you consolidate. So how would we do things like how many representatives from each area would be on the school board? And then when you do that, I am one vote on our board. And so I provide a voice for my community, but if the cuts got so deep, how many districts are going to say, we just can't afford to support and operate these small schools? Because it is very expensive to run a small school. It's much more expensive. You still have to have an English teacher, whether that English teacher is teaching 5 students or 35 students. And so there are a number of there are a number of small schools throughout the state that would be at the mercy of large districts if they were forced to consolidate. And there is a big concern with, even within Sweetwater One, with Farson and Wamsutter, that if the cuts are too deep, at what point do we have to close our small outlying schools? And it's a huge concern. And nobody wants to see their community lose their school. So, that's something we also need to make our state legislators aware of, that when they are talking about forcing consolidation, they are most likely going to force schools to close in a community where that's their only school. And that hurts communities across the state of Wyoming, and it hurts our state as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, I think we've actually answered a few questions with the conversation about House Bill 77. The next question is, why are there special funds for several categories of spending? Why is there not one for certified teachers?
Say that again.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Why are there special funds for several categories of spending? Why is there not one for certified teachers? I'm wondering if that ties in perhaps with transportation has a fund, special education has a fund.
There is one though.
Yeah, the 4 areas that I mentioned earlier that the funding model centers around, there are 2 personnel areas. One is certified staff, and that includes administrators because they are certified. And then the other is classified, which would be our transportation, our special ed paras. Well, they would be covered under, but they would come under classified as well. Maintenance, our custodians, our bus drivers, all of those would be under the classified category. So there is a special category for certified staff.
Thank you. Okay. So here's the next question. Speaking of mental health and counselors, I was told by my child's school that they are not allowed to talk to the children about problems happening outside the school. Is this true?
No. The school counselors, nurses, our physical therapists, our occupational therapists, our speech pathologists, they all have like a clinical or a medical type degree, and they cannot provide the clinical services or the medical services within school. Their services have to be around school. And so, they can talk to them about problems going on outside of school if it's impacting the school environment. Does that kind of make sense? There is a line that has to be drawn.
Yes. Okay, I am wondering if I will even be able to apply for a position to start my career. Do we know if there will be any new hires if the enrollment increases next school year?
I sure hope so. I mean, that would be our hope. I think what it comes down to is it makes me sad that education is being attacked, right? Because we have all of these pieces, everybody, a lot of facts are being cherry picked, and therefore it's leading to a lot of misinformation. And it makes me sad because we should be advocating for the highest and best quality education for our kids and not fighting against each other. We shouldn't be attacking education and every little thing, and they're overpaid, or you don't need this. This is just a privilege. But this is the education we were privileged to growing up, and our kids and grandkids should be privileged to that too. And so my hope is to come together, because we cannot cut our way out of this. We've already hit the bone. We can't. Now it's going to hurt kids. So we need to come together, and we need to start looking at those revenue sources. And that is what you guys need to tell the elected officials. Attacking education to try to turn people against us just to have cuts. Just remember, in the end, the people that this impacts are the students.
Well, and to piggyback on that, we've heard people from the governor, any elected official, businesses, we must diversify our economy in the state of Wyoming. We've been hearing this for 5, 6 years. I've been working with the legislature probably close to 20 years, and they have been talking about diversifying the economy in Wyoming for at least that long. But in my mind, and many others agree with this, cutting education is counterproductive. If we cut education, where are we going to find the employees, the workforce for these diversified industries? So cutting education is never good when it comes to trying to grow an economy. You want to promote, we know that industry, whatever business talks about coming to Sweetwater County, where's one of the first things they look at? They look at the schools. And because they know that their employees are going to want good schools for their families. And so cutting education is just not the answer to growing an economy and progressing with a diversified economy.
Thank you. Our next question, what things are being done to retain and reassure teachers knowing cuts might be coming?
I'll go ahead and start on this one. The district's really has taken a lot of measures to support our staff. And I think one of the biggest system changes that we've got coming is the 4-day week. And we know it's a big change for our community. We've been preparing for that for over a year. But we know that recruiting staff and having them stay, a lot of them are interested in that 4-day week. They really want the balance between their professional life and their family time at home. Also, with that 4-day week, we want to increase our student achievement. And by doing so, we need time for our teachers and our staff to really work together to analyze the data, how our students are learning and performing, and putting those measures in place to help them achieve. We know at the beginning, Nicole had mentioned that a lot of our staff, teachers across the United States, they go into education and half of them leave after the first 5 years. And we don't want that statistic here for Sweetwater One. We want to be able to keep all of our staff, our quality staff, and have our district be the very best in the state. And so one of the first measures that we've got is the 4-day week that's going to be coming soon.
Thank you.
If I might, if I might add, Superintendent, we also have the early retirement incentive to, create some of the open positions as well, and hopefully avoid a reduction in force.
Well, and as was stated earlier, one of the things that we are doing is, as we have gotten some retirements, as we are getting some resignations, each of those positions is being analyzed and looked at to make sure that it needs to be replaced. In some cases, it may be juggled a little bit in order to accommodate a different certification or something like that. So every position is being looked at with the idea that keeping the staff that we have and hoping that we will have some positions that we can hire for, but at the same time, keeping our staff is of utmost importance to us. Yes, so, and again, we would encourage our employees, we know that you're parents too. So feel free to contact your legislator and speak to the impacts that it has on you as a teacher, but also as a parent for your children and the impact it's going to have. Obviously, we don't want to lose, there again, it's counterproductive. If we lose employees, their families move away, we lose students. That's counterproductive to what we're trying to do. So again, please consider contacting your legislator and sharing with them your personal story.
Carol, I think one thing that is really important for all of our viewers, whether they're parents, teachers, bus drivers, any employee for the district, I think it's very important for our school community to know how much we advocate on behalf of Sweetwater number one. I know Carol Scott and I always attend the legislative meetings, whether it's in person or virtual. We've expanded that. All of our directors here in the room, our trustees have been extremely supportive, and we appreciate all of the work and the time efforts to be very transparent and put the importance of Sweetwater One, the kids and the staff out in front and doing our best for them. So, and we'll continue to do that throughout this process and always will.
You have a question, Nicole?
I think one of the topics that is a huge misunderstanding, Mr. Celeroli, is if we are having all of these cuts, why are we using our budget to build a new satellite high school? And what's the point of even having that? And also, why would you put a turf field and a track in when we are in a budget cut?
Okay, a couple of things there. First off, when we decided to build the satellite school, it's downsized from the original design, which was for a full-blown replacement high school. The high school is still at actually over capacity. So we moved forward with that funding, which was legislatively approved. Those funds to build that school were actually from 3 years ago. And so that budget moved forward. We still have the need for the school. And so that was why the state allowed us to move forward on that. It has nothing to do with district funds directly. Those are funds at the SFD and the SCD, which is the School Construction Division for the Wyoming School Facilities Department, appropriated at the time. And like I said, those funds were in there for 3 years. So that's why we're moving forward with the satellite school. There is still a need. That school is still over 1,400 kids. And so the overflow of those kids will go into that school, and that will give us hopefully a chance to get in to do some renovations to the existing school. Those are actually under the new current guidelines where you have to look at taking your older schools and renovating them to what they call the most cost-effective means to bring the schools up to the suitability standards. As far as the football field, the turf field and the track, those were actually enhancements. What an enhancement is now, well, by the end of legislative session, will be anything that is district initiated. So what that means is we had a regular grass field, and at some point in time, the district decided to get the prices for a artificial turf field, along with a rubberized surface track, which the state does pay for replacement of, but because it was a specialized covering, all of the upgrades to the field were paid for by the rec mill board for Sweetwater County, okay, or Sweetwater County 1. So those repairs, when the most recent repairs on the replacement of the turf fields usually last. If you only have one football field, they say that it'll last about 7 years. If you have one or more, or two or more, then they go up 10 years, 13 years, whatever. Since we do have two football fields, but we have one football field at the high school that we use the majority of the time, it lived out its life cycle cost, 10 years. So when the time came to replace it, the track was in disarray because we actually have some underground springs that popped up that started tearing the track up. Those kind of repairs I was allowed to make the upgrades and come in and rip out the old track and re-excavate and bring in new soils and mitigate the water that was underneath with major maintenance money. That was a small portion. The majority of that track and field was with the rec mill dollars. So it's separate from the school district's budget. Those are rec mill dollars, and that is a whole different, budget. Has nothing to do with our school funds. Same thing with the scoreboard. The rec board paid for the scoreboard. It had nothing to do with my budget or the district's budget. So as far as those, and I've heard those same rumors where people were wondering, how come when times are tough, you guys are doing these kind of things? And the other thing too, one of the things out there was, well, when you open up the satellite school, just mothball it. Okay, how do you mothball a brand new building? It takes 1 to 3 years to work out all the bugs. That would be the most irresponsible thing to do because you're building a new building, you open up the doors, you turn it on, you have to make sure everything runs. What about your 1-year warranties? Are you going to just let the thing idle? I mean, you can't let it sit. You have to get in there and let the building perform. So that's your first year. The other thing too is when I walk this building and I see all the different technologies that are going into the building, and I've said this before, we're taking kids from a CTE program and we're putting them into one of the most advanced buildings in the state of Wyoming. Why would you deny those students that opportunity? So shutting the school down, mothballing it, You can only multiple them for 3 years. I wouldn't recommend it because of the warranty issues, because of the opportunities that you miss. And it's a really nice facility. I mean, I just don't understand the thought process. You're not going to save that much money because we're moving staff from the high school down there. It's not like we're hiring new staff. So overall, again, like consolidating districts, the savings just isn't there. So and while I have the mic, if it's okay,
Sure, go ahead.
I did have a facility plan meeting with the state of Wyoming. It was my final meeting as we move forward through our year. It's required by state statute that I have this meeting every year. My schools are funded by how many people we have in those schools. And the one thing I know for a fact, I don't have to wait for legislators to come out of their budget. I already know how much I'm being cut. We in this district have 1,081,000 gross square feet of building space. And that's educational space. Of that 1,081,000 and change, we get paid for 998,000. We basically have like 150 something thousand square feet in excess. To give you an idea of what that is, that's two square footage wise, that's two stagecoaches. Stagecoach is 78,000 square feet. It's a stagecoach and a Farson school. I mean, that's a lot of square footage that we will not get paid for because that was based on July. And I don't know, generally our budgets are based on our enrollment in October. But for some reason, this year's facility plan, they took July 1's enrollment for the previous months. Well, we had COVID, people were out of school, so we were at an all-time low. I believe Trustee Batolo, when he saw one of those, he saw how on the graph how it kind of nosedived, and he was concerned that in 2035 we'd only have. It showed that our progression would be only like 2,000 students in Sweetwater 1. And I brought that up to their attention. We're not the only district that brought that up because they actually calculated last year's 1920 student enrollment in their projections. Well, we're not the only district, but in our district, it did show a severe drop. So I asked if they can at least earmark that asterisk, put an asterisk that it was a pandemic, because in all of the years previously, a 10-year cohort study behind us, we kind of level off, and we level off in around the 5,500 student range. So, but going forward, that doesn't help me because they use July 1's enrollment numbers, how we finished the year. I will only get funded for 998,000 square feet of building space.
So they took the 684 numbers that we reported in June, 2 weeks. They had to report within 2 weeks of the
Right,
end of
which was
school.
on my 680 report, yeah. Yep.
I'm sorry, Dan, I did
That's
not know
okay.
that. I was astonished. I'm over here losing my mind.
Yeah, so for me, my budget coming in July will be significantly cut, but I still have that square footage that has to be maintained. And one of my arguments to them was, we only have about 60,000 square feet that is in what they classify as enhancement. Enhancement, again, is anything that was a district initiated for construction. In the past, this district has been blessed because they were robust, they had a good economy, and so our rec board had money set aside. But even though we had money set aside, we only have like 60,000 square feet added onto our buildings that were enhancements. Those would be like our gymnasiums. In the past, previous administrators thought that it would benefit the kids in this district to have the state increase the size of classrooms, and the rec board paid for the size, for building the gyms. Well, who expected, to have a downturn like we have? And the way the state law is written is if the rec mill builds it, the rec mill has to maintain it. So where I'm at now is even at 159,000, if you take 59,000 square feet, we still have 100,000 square feet that has to be maintained. And that's what I do there is we just rob Peter to pay Paul. You get X amount of dollars, you stretch your dollars as best you can. In the past, they used to actually put it per building. Each building got its own budget. Now they just lump it all together, and I have to kind of just see, where the needs are. And, we keep accurate records. I can show every school principal or anybody exactly where our dollars go, how much we spend per school, and we usually have a really good across the board, unless like this year, we had a little bit of a anomaly at the high school. It's one of our older buildings. It's in worse shape than most of our buildings. We put a new HVAC system. This year, we spent right at $1 million at the high school. And that high school could probably use another 10 to $12 million to bring it up to the new suitability scores.
Thank you, Dan. I think that Mr. Mickelson actually wants to address us again.
Max, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Stephanie. I wanted to say thank you to everybody who's attended tonight. And I wanted to point out that while it is unusual for you to attend as a member of the public to education late into the evening, that what you are seeing, all of the people that are sitting at the cab who are making this meeting possible, is normal for administrators and teachers. 5 o'clock this morning, my wife was grading and entering grades. After school, she stayed to help students who were behind and needed help catching up. And then from the minute she got home until I logged on to this meeting, she was doing planning and prep and grading so that she was ready for tomorrow. Our teachers and our administrators routinely put in 12, 13, 14-hour days for our students. And we really need you to take that message to our legislative folks and to your friends and neighbors that teachers and our school districts are not here, living the high life, watching Married with Children, eating bonbons. They are working very hard because they want our kids and our communities to succeed. And they are putting in absolutely horrendous hours to make that happen. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max.
I think one thing that would be good for the community to know is we've got another one of these scheduled for Thursday morning at 7:15. And so if you think of other questions that when you have a couple of days to reflect on those, so jump on Thursday morning, and we hope to see everybody. And
What was the time again, Kelly? 7?
7:15
7:15.
until 8:45 will be
Okay,
here.
thank you.
And I too would like to express well, go ahead, Nicole.
I was just gonna plead to the community that, I've heard a lot of misinformation. I think in some ways to attack education and make people be okay with cutting it. And so I plead that people ask questions so that we can clarify the facts. I mean, there is no misspending, and we are heavily audited every year. And they grill us with questions to verify that we are not misspending appropriated funds. So please ask questions and get the facts, because there's been, again, a lot of cherry picking to make, I think, education around the state look bad by salaries, or administration seems to be the one that's being attacked. And, I am very protective of our principals and our directors. And I guess I would always disagree, because I know that in the mines and stuff, if one supervisor had 27 subordinates, you would never see that, ever.
Well, every purchase that we make, I think it's really, really important. I'm in IT, so we know IT does a lot of purchasing. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. But I will say that every single purchase that we make, and every time we figure our budgets, we are asking ourselves, our department heads, our directors are asking ourselves, is this what's best for kids? What is the impact going to be for kids? How is this going to help kids? And how is this going to help our staff to help our kids?
And I would say, when you talk to people who think that the districts are flush with money, that's just not the case. As Nicole said, we are extremely heavily audited. There's not buckets of money sitting around in different places. It just doesn't exist. I would also say that you'll hear a lot of legislators tell you that we are not getting our bang for our buck as a state. And I will tell you that according to the NAEP scores, Wyoming is listed in the top 5 in the entire country as far as scores. So, and we have been moving up steadily. We also know that there are some legislators that say, why does it cost so much more in Wyoming than it does in our surrounding states? And I will suggest to you, because I'm familiar with Utah, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with Utah as well. You look at the Wasatch Front, the area from Provo up through Salt Lake and up to Ogden and into Logan. That's their high-density population. That's where they have the majority of their students. And just like Rock Springs is large in Wyoming, that's where their population area is the biggest. It's much less expensive to educate children when you have a lot of children, because you can put those big classes together, than it is in rural Wyoming like Wamsutter or Farson. And by Salt Lake standards or by Utah standards, Rock Springs is small. So it just costs more to educate students in smaller settings. And that's why it costs so much more for education in Wyoming than it does in our surrounding states. I just would remind you that Wyoming has always in a previous work position that I had, I traveled all over this country. And they told me, they would always ask, how do you get the funding for education in Wyoming that you do? And we've always had very supportive legislators when it comes to public education. For some reason, they have looked at the amount of money that is being spent on education and have decided that for whatever reason that that's not in the best interest of the state. I would suggest to you and to them that there could not be a better place to put money than in education. And if we want to diversify the state of Wyoming, education is the way to do that. I want to thank everyone for logging on tonight. If you had your questions answered and you thought that this was a good idea, please tell your neighbors and friends that they could log on again Monday or Thursday morning at 7:15. We're going to do this again, and we thank you so much for your support, for your questions, giving us an opportunity to share with you the education system here in Rock Springs. Anyone else?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.